Hey guys, welcome to Code Decode. In this video, we are going to cover some very tricky scenario-based questions for JPA, Hibernate and transaction management, which is a very important and tricky part of these topics. So let's get started and let's see what scenarios are right now being asked in 2025. So let's get started. A very important question is that you're using the transactional annotation. But even though you're using it, your changes are not getting reflected in database. What could be the reason? I'll give you one quick example with the code base first, too much of theory, and then we will see why this scenario can occur. So this is a user service class, a simple user service class of our food delivery application. In that, if I have used transactional over the save user method, which does nothing but gets the user repository bean and save the user that you pass. But you create the user in the same class with the new user and try to save it. This code will not work. What can be the very basic reason? Because Spring uses AOP, that is proxies, to manage the transactions. It creates proxies around the bean that has transactional methods. So even though you have used transaction on the method level, the proxy is created around the whole user bean, user service bean. And since this user service bean has to be used as a proxy, this create user method who calls the save user is a part of this user service, which will not be able to call the proxy of this class, will rather call the same class. And hence this code will not work. So if I call the transactional within the same class, that is a user service class, the Spring bypasses the proxy and the transactional doesn't work. It works as good as the normal simple method call. And if your automatic flush is not there, and if auto commit is not there for your code and your database that you're using, downside database, then your data will not be reflected in the database. So this save user method, which is annotated with transactional, that means the Spring would normally manage the transactional when the save user is called, and it will not give a call to proxy transactional method. So since the create user method is called within the same class, this causes the Spring to bypass the proxy, and essentially the save user method is a normal method call and not the Spring transactional method management call, and the transaction management will not kick in. So this is the case if automatic commits are not there for your underlying database, then this code will not work for you. Make sure that even though you use transaction on the method level, the proxy is created on the class level. If this topic is too much difficult to understand, just let me know in the comment section. I'll create a very separate video on how the transaction management works with the proxies, the external beans and everything. Let me know in the comment section. I'll do that. Now, how do you fix this? Don't have to do anything. Since proxy is created on the class level, to manage the transaction, though on the method level, you have to call the method from outside this bean or the class. So this service will create a bean. The bean will be created as a proxy for this particular transaction. To call this, you have to call outside the bean. So you have to create another service, maybe XYZ service. You auto-wire your user service, which stores everything and which is to be kicked in with the transaction management of Spring. Then just give a call like this. So what I've done is I've not done anything. I've just copied this method and created it outside in a different class and not in the user service class. So this method remains in the user service class, which saves the user. But to call this method, I am using a different class. Usually you will do it with the controller layer. So always give a call to transactional method from another managed bean of Spring. So instead of calling the save user from directly inside the same class, we are calling it from an external class, which is also a managed bean. Remember, it has to be the managed bean again. When the external service gives a call, the Spring's proxy is involved because it is an external call, and thus the transactional behavior works as expected. Remember, it might work, it might not work for you, depending upon the behavior of your underlying database and the flush and the commit responses. But it will not work as expected if you're using in the same class. So that is the way how you can fix it. The second reason why your transactional management, the Spring transaction management is not working. because you might have used the wrong propagation type. So knowledge of getting the proper propagation is very important. A video is already there which covered this. But if you use by mistake the never propagation, that means this propagation will never work. There will be no transactional alive. And if your code says that a code has to be committed into database only in the transaction, then this user will not be saved. So if you use transaction propagation as never, your code will not be saved in the database if auto commit is not there. So you have to use the correct propagation level that is required, which is by default and usually recommended. Then your data will be reflected in the database properly. Secondly, no exception thrown. Now this is a very tricky part, okay? And this is a very bad part also. I do not expect this, that such a basic thing every developer would know, but Spring rollbacks the transactional only on unchecked exception, that is on runtime and error. If the exception or the method thrown is a checked exception, like IO exception or the normal simple exception, even this simple exception, if I can show you here, this exception is the checked exception. So this is also a checked exception that I can show you in the exception.class.class file, that this exception is a checked exception because it is not a subclass of runtime exception. So if this is a checked exception, so instead of getting the rollback, the transaction commits. The question was, the changes are not getting reflected as expected. So if I give you this code, then this is a save user method, which is a transactional method. So either it should be done completely or it should not be done. Here at line number 1, I save it, but then I throw an exception. Then what I expect, the data should not be visible in the database. The user data should not be saved in the user repository. But it will be saved. The data is not rolled back. Why is that so? Even though it is transactional, why is that so? If I had removed this transaction, then user 1 automatically commits, and even after that you throws an exception, no rollback because there was no transaction. Here I have added the transaction, still the data is not getting removed from the database, it is still getting persisted into the database. Why is that so? Reason being the rule that Spring by default rollbacks only on the checked exception. So if you send the unchecked exception, then fine, it will roll back. But if it is a checked exception, you will be in trouble. How to fix it? You can explicitly tell that you have to roll back for exception.class also. I'll give you a better example with file.io, which is a real-time example. So assume you have a method that saves something in the database. A file or the IO error occurs. So here, this is simulation of processing a file. So what you are expecting, that if the file that I'm trying to access is not openable or the IO exception fails, my data for that user should not be saved until I should get all the information of that user from that file. But that doesn't happen. With very limited amount of information, you are saving everything into the database, even though your file for that particular user is not opening or it is not available. Then you are in trouble. So the user service who saves and processes the file will not work as expected because it is throwing an IO exception. Suppose this process file throw an IO exception. What happens? The user.save user method saves the user to database and the transaction is still open. If an IO exception occurs, the transaction will not roll back because again IO is a checked exception. So by default, since Spring rollbacks on unchecked only, and since it was the checked exception, it does not trigger a rollback. And what is the consequences? The user record will still be available even though you had a file IO exceptions. So this will lead to an inconsistent data. And how do you make sure it doesn't happen? You explicitly say that please roll back for the checked exceptions also. So if you throw this IO exception in the part of your method, you have to mark this rollback also for this IO exception method. There is an alternative way also that you can have multiple exceptions for rollback like this also. So you might come to me and say that, how many type of checked exceptions are there? Will I write everything? So write only those which are expected to occur in your method, not everything. For example, you give a call to SQLDB, then give a SQL exception. If you open a file, if you do IO, then do that. Fourth is again very less possibility of occurring because Spring Boot automatically have the flush behavior. So if you use cache and if you use only a Spring application, not a Spring Boot application, and there is no implicit flush functionality, then it might not work, and you have to explicitly use entity manager dot flush. But luckily, Spring uses lazy flushing, which means changes are not immediately written to the database, but it will be done at the end of transaction. And you're using Spring Boot, it might do it automatically for you. Now, isolation levels. We have seen the propagation level. The knowledge of that is important. Do not use never kind of propagation. Then it will not never be into the transactional layer where you are saving the data. Now, second is isolation layer. Now, we have multiple isolations there. One of the worst is read uncommitted. That means you read the data which is not yet into the database, committed properly from in a transaction. If you read such data and update yourself, there can be a case that might roll back and you will remain in a very bad situation. And your data which you are saving and updating here will be a non-existent data. And hence, the data that you are trying to save might not be the right one, or has to be reflected in DB. So you can use proper isolation level. For this, a video is already created. Just let me know if you need more about it. Third, again, the sixth is very common issue. If you make a read-only transaction, then in that transactional boundary, if you try to update the database, it will have no effect. Your user will not be saved. So for this reason, just remove the read-only part. By default, it is for the write operations. Again, this is something which is not for the Spring Boot applications. The simple Spring application, you have to enable @ transaction, which is by default auto-configured for you in Spring Boot app. So conclusions, why your changes are not properly reflected, either rollback or not updated in the DP can be because of the proxy issue, because this is a very internal issue of Spring that it uses proxy over the whole class and not the method. So for that reason, if you give a call from the same method, you are in trouble. If you have not used propagation and isolation levels properly, if you have not flushed it explicitly, if it is not available, if you have not rolled back on the case of exception, the checked exception, then also you will read the data which should not be there in the database. By default, mistakenly you have made it as true, and you might not have enabled the transaction management, which is in a very specific Spring application, not a Spring Boot application. Hey guys, recently we have launched a course covering an end-to-end full stack application using Angular as front end and microservices and Spring Boot as the back end. Also, we have used Cloud to deploy this application, and we have used CI/CD, that is Jenkins and Argo CD, for continuous integration and continuous deployment. The technologies that we have used is REST, RESTful web services, Spring Boot and microservices for backend, Angular for front end. GitHub we have used for version control system. Also, to make the code unit testable, we have used JUnits. We have used Sonar for code quality checks. Also, for containerization, we have used Docker and Kubernetes. And to deploy this whole application, we have used AWS and multiple services from AWS. Also, we have used SQL as well as NoSQL, that is MongoDB and SQL. On AWS, since for the SQL we have RDS, we have used those services, and Jenkins and Argo CD for CI/CD pipeline. Also, this is an architecture of the application that we have created where the front end is Angular and the back end is microservices. We have used ALB load balancers, Ingress for routing and load balancing. And we have used SQL and MongoDB for SQL and NoSQL DB management with Eureka Server and all those microservices counterparts. Now, this is the CI/CD pipeline. This is the CI/CD flowchart for the application that we have created on local. So this is something, a flow when you create an application in local, push it to GitHub, create a Jenkins pipeline, and do the CI/CD using Jenkins and Argo CD. And at the end, deploy the whole code at AWS EKS. Complete description of this course is covered in a very separate video. The link for that video is also given in the description bar below. And also the link to purchase that course from Udemy is also in the description bar below. So please go and check the description for all these links. Now for the transactions, you might have follow-up questions. For example, what is a default propagation type? It is required. This is also covered in the video earlier. How does Spring handles rollback for the different exception types? For different exception types means the checked and unchecked exceptions. So the Spring rollbacks only and only on unchecked exceptions or runtime exceptions, not on the checked exceptions. This is a very tricky part. Even I forget it many a times. What happens if you call a transaction method within the same class? Then it is bypassed because Spring uses AOP, which uses internally the proxy to give a call. And if you use the same class, transaction won't work. Now, a second very important part. Whenever we use the generation of the IDs, so for example, when we use Hibernate JPA, we expect that at least ID should be auto-generated. I should not write 1, 2, 3, 4, and I should not maintain a counter for it. So yes, that does happen. They do have the iterate generated value with multiple strategies. Now, if you use a generation type as auto, but while inserting the records, IDs are not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They might be 1, 10, 51. Can this happen? Question number 1. Answer is yes. Then the second question follow-up will be, why did this happen? How would you debug this issue? Now, this is a very corner case, but many a times asked in the trickier interview questions. The first thing that you notice here is this is auto. When you allow the Hibernate to use the auto, it chooses on its own. So Hibernate chooses the ID generation strategy based on the database. So if you use MySQL or PostgreSQL, it might use identity. If you use Postgre or Oracle, it might use sequence. And table based if you explicitly say that. So by default, if your Hibernate chooses sequence, if you're using Postgres or Oracle, it might pre-allocate the IDs in batches, leading to gaps. Now, why gaps? For example, if you're using the generation type sequence, which is internally chosen by the Hibernate framework for you because you have not explicitly tell them what to use, then Hibernate reserves the block of IDs, say 1 to 50, for the better performance. Now, if transaction restarts or fails, before all the 0 to 50 IDs are used, then what happens? It starts from 51. So, for example, Hibernate has reserved 1 to 50 for the batch insert. But by any reason, your transaction fails, rollbacks, application restarts, then it will start from 51, skipping all the other numbers. So what you can see is a few of your records are 1, 2, 3, 5, 4, 5, and then 51, 52, 53, 54, which is a bad user experience. Second is the transaction rollbacks and failures. So if a transaction fails and rollback, then the ID which is assigned is lost, causing the gaps in the sequence. For example, I've added in batches 1, 2, 3, 4, but the fifth transaction rolls back. So fifth is removed and sixth is what is assigned. So there is a gap in the ID assigned. So that is also a problem for you. Next is multiple application instances. So this happens a lot of time in your real world example where different instances have different ID ranges. Then some pods uses this particular 1 to 10, some uses 10 to 20, some uses 30 to 40, and that leads to gap in your common database. Also, there is some database specific behavior that MySQL with identity strictly is sequential except for rollbacks. So if you know that you're using MySQL, always go with identity. But if you have the rollback, then make sure that you read the previous ID. If you use PostgreSQL, you can always use sequence, but the problem is you can have the gaps if they try to do the performance and improvement and they try to add the IDs in batches. For Oracle, the same one, you can use the sequences, but again, gap can occur for even if you have the caching enabled. Now, how do you fix it? So the first option is you can always strictly use generation type identity for sequential IDs for MySQL and PostgreDBs. So it works very well for database that supports these, but this might not be supported for Oracle. Remember that. Then you are in trouble. Now ensure that IDs are sequentially, but disable the batch inserts. That is what you have to do. If you disable the batch insert, then gaps will not be there. But the problem is for bulk insert, then it will be very slow because IDs will be generated in sequence 1, 2, 3, 4 rather than a complete bulk insert. For the second way, you can use the sequences, which works very nicely with other databases like Oracle also. But this is again strictly sequential with this, but it is very slow because it is not doing things in batches. You are explicitly saying that disable the batch processing. Also, you are using sequences. So by default, it will avoid the gaps, but it will be slower than the default one. The last one is if you need a very strong control on what is happening, you can manage a table also. So you can store the last assigned ID in the table, and that is how you can explicitly avoid the gaps. This is highly efficient, but it's not that efficient for high volume bulk inserts again. But this gives you a very strong hold on what you are assigning as the IDs. So if sequence is very crucial, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 50, 51 is not allowed, then you can use identity or sequence and remove the bulk insert for the better performance. If performance matters, you can allow pre-allocations like 1 to 50, 52, 51 to 100, then there can be a possible gaps for you. But if you really want full control, you don't want neither the gaps, nothing should be there, you can use your own table generators. If you want to know more about that, let me know in the comment section. I have many more questions to cover. That is why I'm just going through it. But these all concepts in its own are a very important concepts to be covered whenever you implement anything in the enterprise level application. Now, a very important scenario based question that is commonly very asked in all interviews, N+1 query problem. So let's first understand what is this N+1 query problem, and let's see how to fix it. Suppose you have a department table and it has multiple employees mapped to it. So one department can have multiple employees, and you have made it as fetch type lazy. So when you try to find all, what happens is, first it fetches all the departments. Then for each department that you fetch, it fetches all the employees for that department. So n number of queries for employees and one extra query to fetch the departments. So what happens is, first query fetch all the departments, select everything for department. Then rest n queries fetch all employees for each department separately. That is, select star from employee where department ID is 1, select star from employee, department ID is 2, 3 and so on. So if there are 100 departments, then there will be 100 employees query and one query to fetch all these IDs that you are trying to add here. So total of one query for fetching all the departments and n number of queries for fetching all employees from n number of departments. So this degrades the performance very bad. So total of 101 queries just to fetch all the departments and its corresponding employees, because you have made this as lazy loaded. First, the department will be fetched, and only if required, then corresponding employees will be fetched for that department. So how you can fix it? Firstly, you can say that no, don't use the lazy one. But that's a very bad idea, because there might be the case you might not need the employee data all the time. So let's not give this as a solution at first. The best way to fix it is using either the join or the graph, entity graph. Entity graph might be a new topic to you. Let me know in the comment section if you need a very deep video on this. Otherwise, I'll cover on the top level. No worries. So what is join fetch? So whenever you try to fetch all the departments with employees, you can join these two tables. So select D from department, join, select all the employees of that particular department. This is the join query which you can use, and in single one query, how it will be working then? Only one query will execute. That is, select everything from employee and department, from department, left join on employees where department ID equals to employee.department ID. So this eliminates n number of queries and executes just one query, and hence increases the performance. But remember, left join also decreases the performance at a very bad level. So what is the second solution? To use entity graph. Now first let's see what is an entity graph. Entity graph is just a feature provided by JPA to give a fine-grained control over the relationships of entities that should be eagerly fetched without modifying this lazy annotation. Or you can write the custom queries also, but that can also be avoided if you use the entity graph. Now, entity graph allow you to dynamically fetch without modifying the query. For example, if there is a department, there is a list of employee with the fetch type lazy, you are not changing the annotation, you are not changing the mapping. What you are doing is, you have the entity graph query created that on the department.employees, please fetch all the employees. So this is a named entity graph, and how do you use it? Now you would ask me, okay, you have annotated the name of this particular entity graph is this, and you are expecting employees to be fetched for the department table. So how do you use it? So when you write this query of fetching all the departments with employees, the query remains the same, that select the department from department table. But over that, you can see there is a graph entity graph with the name as department.employees, which you have already defined in the named entity graph. And you say that please load all the employees along with the department table. So now department and employees are fetched in one single query and will avoid n+1 queries. There is also one more way to improve the performance of such kind of fetching. If you cannot modify the query, so there can be a case that you cannot modify the code base, the queries, then what will you do? So if you cannot modify the queries directly, that is, you cannot use join fetch, there are two batch fetching strategies also, where you can fetch the employees in the batches of 10. So when you describe your employees relationship in department as one to many, you can say that even though you're fetching it lazy, please fetch the employee in batches of 10. So how does it work? So instead of fetching all the employees one by one in the each department, Hibernate fetches them 10 at a time. This reduces of query from n to n by 10. So your n+1 problem is reduced to n by 10+1 problem. The second option is a sub-select mode. It fetches all the child entries in one sub-query instead of separate queries. So how does it work? Instead of select start from employee where department is 1, department is 2, it runs a sub-query that select everything from employee where department is in, select ID from department. So it reduces the query to 2. How? Select query for department and 1 for sub-select query. Now, remember a key takeaway. A sub-query also reduces the performance. So this is also not the good way. You can always go with the best, according to me, should be either use joint fetch or the entity graph. But if you're not able to do that, then you can go for batch sizes or fetch mode as sub-select. If for sure you cannot modify your queries. But if both the cases you cannot do anything, you can go for eager loading, which is the worst part. So that was all about n+1 query problem. If you want to know more about it, you can let me know in the comment section. Already one video is created separately for n+1 query. Now a very fourth important point, what is soft delete in JP and Hibernate? Whenever you go to an interview, they would always expect you to have some knowledge on soft delete. Now let's understand the soft delete, okay? So whenever you have the CRUD in your Spring Boot application, you have CRUD, create, read, update and delete. What you do in delete? Delete from employee table. But what it does is, it will remove the data completely from your logs, your tables. It will be completely swiped out. There will be no existence of what actually was there in your table initially. So that is a hard delete. What is a soft delete? Soft delete means that if the record is inactive, you, rather than deleting it physically from the table, you can mark it with some flag, and which is useful to retain some historical data or to recover some deleted records. For example, you're maintaining the employee list for example TCS. They does not rehire their old people. So what they can do is, if they delete the complete employee record from their database, that this employee has left TCS in 2008, let's not make him join again. If they did the hard delete, they would never be knowing that this person was already there in the TCS. So for that reason, they might be doing the soft delete. That is, it is marking as inactive for that employee. So if that employee comes back to TCS in 2025, oh, this person is in the database record, though it is inactive, but it was there. So I'm sorry, you cannot join TCS. A very simple, very real-time example. So that's the difference between hard delete and soft delete real-time usage. So how do you implement the soft delete? You just use the flag. There are multiple ways to implement it, but the very common way is, this is a soft delete. You maintain a Boolean variable and you mark it as false. It's not deleted right now. Going forward, if you do not want that user to be there in the CRUD operation, in the delete operation for the CRUD, you can mark that as is deleted true and store it in the database. So how do you exclude those entities automatically from getting fetched into your user or employee class? Then you have to make sure that in the where clause, you have to make sure that is deleted false are to be filtered out. Then only those users will be there in your output list who are currently active. So the question was like, if you mark it as deleted, but still when you try to find all the employees, they will come into the result. So this is just a way to automatically filter out the deleted rows which will not come into your select queries. So now all queries will automatically exclude the soft deleted records without modifying them. So you don't have to delete it, you have to just modify the where clause over your entity, which entity has this is deleted variable. Also, what you can do is, second solution is, you can use the SQL delete clause that update the user is deleted to true where ID is this, and in the where clause you can make sure that it will not come into the filter. So now entity manager.remove will soft delete instead of physically deleting the data. So SQL delete, what it does is delete from user table. That's it. Where ID is this. What overriding you have done is, rather than just using the delete from user table where ID is this, you have made update table, set the variable as true where ID is this. So this initially the original behavior is to hard delete. You have overridden this to not to hard delete but to just update the variable as this. So this also you can do on the entity level also. That's the beauty of Hibernate. But what is the downside of using SQL delete? While SQL delete is a very powerful mechanism, this soft deleted entities are still in cache. So that may be accessible if cache is used before the deletion is done. So you might not need to clear your context and your cache after you have made those changes. Also, you have cascading operations, like your child will not be updated if the SQL delete is involved. So remember, these things look so good, but you have to manually handle eviction. You have to manually handle the child entities if cascading is not there. So I always prefer you use cascading equals true for all. So with all that, the best practices says you combine the SQL delete and where clause to be in a very best position. So just the summary, the soft delete is implemented using a Boolean flag. The where clause with this particular clause is used to automatically exclude those records. SQL delete can be used to override the delete query and mark the records as deleted rather than externally physically removing it. And be aware of the caching and cascading issues and the join queries, which still might fetch the deleted data. So this was a very important concept. I can agree that soft delete, you should know what it is and how to do it. If you need more questions on this, just let me know in the comment section. I'll cover all those. But these four were the very tricky parts of Hibernate and JPA where many people do mistakes. Let me know in the comment section if you have more such questions. Thank you.